Well, good evening, everyone. It's lovely to have this opportunity to speak with you all about a subject that is very close to my heart, and that is the nature of good leadership. Welcome to our masterclass. My name is Professor John Shields. I'm a professor of human resource management and organisational studies in the business school at the University of Sydney. The topic of leadership, the good and the bad aspects of leadership, are a fundamentally central theme in many of our disciplinary areas in the business school, but particularly in the area in which I work, human resource management and organizational studies, but also in the broader area of management studies. So what I want to do tonight is to say something to you about good leadership, and particularly about the very controversial and vexed issue of whether the dark side, that is the dark side characteristics, have an upside in terms of good or effective leadership. It's a controversial topic, and I'm hoping that I can move you outside of your comfort zones to think about these things in a dispassionate way. And we'll have a bit of fun along the way. You'll see on your screens a Q&A icon. It's quite okay if you want to key in a question as I'm going through my presentation, and I'll try to field your question as promptly as I can, but I might hold some questions over till the end of the presentation. After the presentation on dark side leadership, we might have follow-up Q&A on the topic, but then go to a brief presentation that I've got for you on the business schools programs in the postgraduate space in HRM and management broadly. But first things first, good leadership. Does the dark side have an upside? Okay, so this is really a summary of the dyadic or binary dark side, light side attributes or issues, the two sides of leadership in terms of individual level qualities or characteristics. And I don't use the word qualities in a positive pejorative sense. Qualities can be negatives as well as positives. So when we talk about dark side leadership, it's seen as the obverse to light side or bright side leadership. So let's start with light or bright side leadership. And to help you understand the framing here, when we talk about light side, the sorts of characteristics that come to the fore in discussion and consideration are those to do with leader authenticity. I'll come back and pick up on that theme in a minute. Leadership that's inspirational, leadership that's not self-focused, but follower-focused, leadership that has a strong sense of ethics or morality, and leadership, if you like, that has a saintly aura to it. Okay, that's the light or bright side. The flip side of that is, of course, the dark side. The dark side of leadership is perhaps best described as leadership that is calculative and manipulative and self-focused and amoral, if not immoral. But if it's immoral, it's sinful. So they're the two sides that I want to deal with in my presentation. But before I go into my presentation, I want to ask you to fill out a slide that I've got, and I have to go down to the end of my presentation to find it. No, it's not there. So we might skip that, I think. What I wanted to do was to get you to do a survey instrument, but it's not turning up on these slides, not to worry. So let's go in to the light side. When we talk about light side, dark side, we tend to have a focus on three defining qualities of each side, light side and dark side. So the light side triad, or three key characteristics, are these: treating others with dignity and respect. Now that flows from the ethics of Immanuel Kant, the great 18th century Enlightenment German philosopher, who essentially argued that what is ethical is doing no harm to others and respecting others in everything you do. Okay, so this is essentially treating others with dignity and respect, the Kantian ethic. The second element of the light or bright triad is faith in human goodness. This is a humanist characteristic. To borrow a phrase from one of my historical heroes, Abraham Lincoln, this is about acknowledging the desirability of the better angels of our nature, if you like, the good side of human nature, acknowledging that there's also a dark side. So faith in human goodness, which is essentially an optimistic outlook. And thirdly, the third element of the light triad is honesty to yourself and honesty to others. And this is really what is meant by the term authenticity. And authenticity, I think these days, is frequently seen as the defining characteristic of bright leadership or light side leadership. The idea of authentic leadership flows from the work of a US pracademic, a practitioner and academic named Bill George, whose work on authentic leadership based upon observations of effective leadership in US organizations came out 20 years or more ago. And essentially his works, Authentic Leadership and True North, Discover Your Authentic Leadership Style, have had a major influence on both practitioner thinking about what constitutes good leadership and what doesn't constitute good leadership. And there he is, Bill George, in all of his glory. So let's have a look at the characteristics of authenticity. All right. So on one definition, as you can see there in the purple box, authenticity requires vulnerability, transparency, and integrity. Vulnerability, transparency, and integrity. Authenticity is seen as being genuine and sincere and open or transparent. It's seen to have a moral integrity to it. It's based upon a deep self-awareness. You can't be authentic unless you understand the nature of your own authenticity. It's said to be emotionally intelligent, understanding your own chemistry emotionally as a way to basically understand and influence for the better the emotionality of others around you, including followers. Authenticity is also seen to be reflective, right? Not dismissive of the past. Reflection on what has gone well and not so well and learning from that. It's open-minded and not opinionated. And it's the last word there in the set, humility, that I think sits at the heart of this notion of authenticity, humility. Whoever would have thought that humility is now seen to be a key attribute of effective leadership? But that's the discourse. It is. So I'll bet you're all thinking, so, okay, he's talking about authenticity, but show us some examples. Who are the authentics? So here's my attempt, and I'm open to discussion about this. Here's my attempt to give you some concrete examples. And I've chosen in the first instance political figures who I think can, on any reasonable estimate, be said to be people who meet the test of authenticity, of transparency and humility and openness, etc., those characteristics I've just described. So there are three males, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and Abraham Lincoln. Three authentics who I think legitimately passed the test of authenticity. What about on the other side of the gender divide? Well, here are two that I think really meet the characteristics pretty effectively. Jacinda Ardern and Angela Merkel, in their own way, exude openness and transparency and authenticity, and also convey a sense of humility. Okay, so they're my political authentics. What about business authentics? Now, this is controversial, and I'll bet you'll challenge some of these propositions, but here we go. So I think Alan Joyce, the CEO of Qantas, is authentic on many of the dimensions I've mentioned before. Christine Holgate, the ex-CEO of Australia Post, I think meets the authenticity test on a number of dimensions. Others might disagree. And they're both Australian business leaders. In the US, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon, has been identified by Forbes magazine as the uppermost authentic in amongst US business CEOs, particularly given the way that he led Morgan Chase out of the global financial crisis a decade ago, and his behavioral approach to turning near disaster around. So again, we can argue about this. I'm simply trying to give you some examples of folk who I think, on many measures, do pass the authenticity test. Okay, but, and it's a big but, you could say authenticity, so what? There is an argument to say that all of the light side characteristics that we've been talking about are just, frankly, too good to be true. No one is that saintly. And just because you're authentic doesn't necessarily mean that you will be an effective or good or great leader. There is evidence, and I'll come back to this a little later, to suggest that some effective leaders have inauthentic or dark side attributes. That is, they play out inauthenticity to achieve their ends. Which raises the question, if you are a leader who's on the dark side, and I'll come back to the dark side characteristics in a minute, if you're a dark side leader, can you be authentically dark side, true to your dark side self? Because if you do, in one sense, you're being authentic. Just that the characteristics you're being authentic about don't comply with that shopping list of bright side attributes that I shared with you earlier on. So there's, if you like, a logical slippage here that I think need to be mindful of. And in my own space of HRM, one of the doyens of US management academics, Jeffrey Pfeffer, has actually described the authenticity model as essentially BS. And you know what the acronym BS stands for. Basically, what Pfeffer is saying is, look, if you look at effective and successful CEOs in the US, most US academics only look at US examples, what you find is that inauthenticity and some of the characteristics I'm about to talk to you about seem to be quite prominent as drivers of leadership effectiveness. Controversial point, all right? So let's just take a breath and think about this. Is it the case that the ostensibly good can also disguise a degree of evil in how people approach their leadership, their work as leaders? So we've talked about the light side triad, yeah, including Kantianism and humanism and authenticity, right? They're the three light side triad attributes. Let's now focus on the dark triad, the three characteristics that are seen to be the defining features of dark side leadership. And there they are: narcissism, which is all about the me, all about I. Well, not me personally, but it's about the self, it's about ego. Secondly, Machiavellianism, which is about, as I'll explain in a minute, about manipulation to get your way, including through deceit and deception. And the third one, arguably the one that people really balk at, is psychopathy. Psychopathy is about malice or deliberate behavior that's deliberately meant to harm others. So it's the obverse, or the reverse, sorry, of the Kantian ethic of doing no harm. Okay, so let's have a look at narcissism first of all. Okay, So narcissism narcissists are essentially individuals who are self-obsessed, and Narcissus was a Greek mythological figure who had a particularly high self-concept. He was self-obsessed, but poor old Narcissus had this high self-concept in the era before mirrors were invented. So rather than look at himself in the mirror and admire his beauty, what he did was actually look at himself in the water of still ponds. And that's why you've got that image there. Narcissus was completely self-obsessed. Narcissists have a very high esteem need, by which I mean they crave admiration and they crave adulation. They're attention seeking and they need to be admired. They really do need their ego reinforced and fed and stroked, I guess you could say. They seek prestige and status. They can be very arrogant in the way that they treat others. They expect special favors from others without necessarily reciprocating. They are very strongly loss averse. If you take something that a narcissist sees as their possession, whether it's a tangible or a psychological possession, status or whatever, away from them, expect trouble because they will come after you. They're generally indifferent to the needs and feelings of others as well. So that's the narcissism syndrome in a nutshell. Maybe this is ringing some bells for you in terms of folk that you know. Keep those thoughts to yourself. Let's think about who we might use as illustrative cases of narcissism. Look, I don't want to be political about this, but what the hell? I think it's reasonable to say that the recent US President Donald Trump had a relatively high degree of narcissism in the way that he behaved. So I would nominate him as one narcissist. I think it's fair to say as well that the Virgin CEO, Richard Branson, is also highly narcissistic. I'm not criticized. I'm simply observing the behavioral traits and saying these behavioral characteristics tend to suggest significant degrees of narcissism. Okay. Now, just to even up the gender balance a bit, and I really struggle with this, maybe you can help me. I put Margaret Thatcher, the 1980s British Prime Minister, in. I'm not entirely persuaded I've got this right, but I've seen some researchers who've indicated they believe that she was relatively highly narcissistic as well. And it isn't just about the big 1980s hair either. So they're examples of narcissists. You might think of others, and if you can think of others, put your thought in the Q&A box, please, and we'll go through them. So that's narcissism, the first of the three dark triad attributes. The second is Machiavellianism. Now, you will all have heard of Machiavelli, Niccolo Machiavelli, the author of one of the Western world's first thoroughly worked up political treatise, The Prince. Machiavelli's The Prince is an arch manipulator and intriguer. And he operates on the principle that it doesn't matter how you get there, as long as you get there. The ends justifies the means, okay? As long as you get there, that's acceptable from a Machiavellian perspective. Ends always justify means, whatever it takes, to use the vernacular. Machiavellians, as I guess you would have guessed, are motivated by the drive for power and control. They want to dominate. They want to be the epicenter of power. Machiavellians tend to be cynical. They tend to be very manipulative, and they can be very callous as well. Okay. You know, if you're looking at this as an admirable set of characteristics, then, you know, that would be interesting. You might want to declare that anonymously. Machiavellians can be sly and deceptive. They manipulate others almost always to get their way, including using false flattery to influence the behavior of others. Now, unlike narcissists, and this is really interesting, Machiavellians can operate behind the scenes rather than in the foreground. Unlike narcissists, they don't always want to be the center of attention. In fact, sometimes they prefer to be very much operating in the shadows to get their way so that the spotlight is not on them. A narcissist would never do that. Okay, so there's a bit of tension here between narcissism and Machiavellianism, but you can see that there's significant overlap in terms of the characteristics of these two triadic dimensions. So Machiavellians. I'm going to be really controversial here, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but I'm exercising my academic judgment here about who I think tends to fit the bill relatively well amongst relatively well-known global characters. And I've, again, chosen political figures because they tend to be better known. So you know who this man is, Vladimir Putin? I don't think there's any doubt. And he would probably feel quite flattered at being described as a Machiavellian, someone who pursues power for its own sake, and who can operate in a way that is, well, let's call a spade, ruthless. Perhaps more subtle in the way he operates is Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister at the moment. Despite 4 elections, he's still there. 4 very contested elections, I should say. This is more controversial. I'm not entirely sold on simply characterizing Prime Minister Netanyahu as a Machiavellian, but I certainly also see some characteristics in the way that he operates, some characteristics that are Machiavellian in their nature. Okay, so that's Machiavellianism. The third dark triad quality is psychopathy. This is the really scary one, okay? Psychopathy. You might say, well, why am I talking about psychopathy rather than sociopathy? They are very similar. Psychopathy is the more pronounced condition than sociopathy, and it subsumes sociopathic behaviors. So psychopaths, when you think of psychopaths, think of Hannibal Lecter, or actually too many Hollywood characters who happen to be male, by the way. Psychopaths tend to be malevolent. They look to harm. They're anti-Kantian in their approach. They have no sense of remorse. They're unconcerned about the immorality or the amorality of their actions. They're callous, bullying, insensitive, and they enjoy inflicting harm on others. So, again, complete reverse to a Kantian ethic. They're cynical. They're habitual calculative liars or non-truth tellers, and they can be emotionally and very manipulative, disingenuous to deceive people and to entrap people. That's psychopathy. If you go online, you'll find, and you Google psychopathic checklist, you'll find a 20-item checklist that actually unpacks psychometrically the elements or the dimensions, technically the facets of psychopathy. And you might want to have some rather scary fun having a look at that checklist. I don't have time to go into its detail with you now. Okay, so who has John come up with by way of examples of corporate psychopaths? Well, here's one. Harvey Weinstein, the male film director who single-handedly sparked the Me Too campaign by women in America and elsewhere around the world against sexual harassment and bullying behavior, directed primarily, but not exclusively, at women. So that's Harvey Weinstein, who is now a guest of the US penitentiary system and is likely to stay there for quite a number of years. The other example that keeps coming up in the literature is a guy named Al Dunlap. if you're over 50, and tragically I am, you might remember Al Dunlap as the CEO of Australian Consolidated Press, the pack-up print media empire in the 1990s. He was known as Chainsaw Al Dunlap because he was the archetypal corporate slasher and burner. Absolutely no compunction about taking out entire swathes of a workforce to re-engineer the organization to be lean and mean. And he made an art form of it. And I guess this is a bit of a homily here. Like a lot of dark side leaders, his approach eventually brought him undone. Same with Einstein. Okay, now I'm going to go right into a very controversial space. But before I do that, because I'm aware of some comments that have been made on social media about this presentation, I am not arguing at all in favor of dark side characteristics. What I am arguing for is, and I think this is reasonable, that we should all actually be mindful of the fact, and it is a fact, there's empirical evidence for this that's significant, that individuals who appear to have enjoyed political and or corporate success do not infrequently demonstrate dark side characteristics, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Okay, so what might it be about the dark side triad that might have, in one sense, a leadership effectiveness upside? Okay, I want you to think in a grounded way about this, not an emotional way. And remember, I am not arguing that this is the way the world should be. What I am saying is, unfortunately, this is the way the world is. So narcissism is associated with self-confidence, assertiveness, moral resilience. Narcissists don't back down, and they have very high self-confidence, and they can be assertive. Every one of those three characteristics I've just mentioned are front and center in most leadership competency profiles and psychometric profiles. They are looked for approvingly in leadership selection processes. Okay. The second, Machiavellianism. What is it associated with in terms of characteristics that often pop up in desirable qualities in leadership profiling? Here they are. Machiavellians are strategic. They're manipulative. They know where they want to go. They know what the end is, and they work out deceitful and manipulative ways to get there. Machiavellians know about it. They have a goal in mind, right? They're great goal setters. This is what I want, and these are the ways I'm going to get there. They can be incredibly persuasive, whether it's in the back room or the front room. Machiavellians also tend to be very composed. Have you ever seen Vladimir Putin, for example, lose his cool in public? I occasionally have seen Benjamin Netanyahu lose his cool in public. But generally speaking, they are very composed in the public domain. And they exercise deep self-control emotionally. So Machiavellians are very emotionally intelligent. But they use that emotional intelligence for manipulative purposes to achieve and hold power and control others. Right? Thirdly, psychopathy. What is it? And I've just noticed that my friend Darth Vader has appeared on the screen. Psychopathy is associated with these things. Right? Now, remember, psychopathy is that characteristic of an individual that's often seen as repugnant and repulsive to people who embrace the bright side qualities, right? Including me. But psychopaths do have charisma. They can be immensely creative in how they go about getting what they want. They can think deeply strategically, they can be forceful, and they can be very composed. Right? Think Hannibal Lecter again. Psychopathy is often associated with murderous criminality. And those characteristics that I've got listed on the screen are often seen as desirable characteristics, every one of them, in good leaders. Okay, so what I'm saying is that there are elements of narcissism and Machiavellianism and psychopathy that appear to overlap with leadership qualities that are ordained in many leadership profiles and selection processes as being desirable. Charisma, creativity, composure, right? So we know that psychopaths are very creative about going about their business. And creativity, according to a relatively recent IBM CEO study in the US, creativity was nominated by US CEOs as the single most important leadership quality, okay? Creativity. The ones that are starred in blue are more to do with what I'd describe as light side qualities: integrity, openness, humility in particular, and perceived fairness. But creativity is at the top of the queue. And we know that Machiavellians and those with psychopathic tendencies can be immensely creative. Okay. And in fact, there was a study that was done in the US about 15 or 20 years ago that compared the level of psychopathy amongst a big sample of US CEOs at that time, with the psychopathic profiles of long-term inmates of the UK maximum security prison Broadmoor. And guess what they found? That the US CEOs on the psychopathic checklist rated more highly than the inmates of Broadmoor. Okay. Now that evidence gives us pause for thought. Okay. I'm not saying it's good. I'm saying it is. And we need to wrestle with that and think about what it means and how it can be responded to. Okay. Now I've walked you through the dark valley. Now I want to take you back out of that and say a few things to you about what dark side leaders probably lack and what they're deficient in. And here's a shopping list. I'm not claiming it's total, but it is what it is. They appear to lack ethical awareness and a moral compass, right? They appear to lack integrity. They appear to lack humility. Narcissists wouldn't be able to spell the word humility. They lack restraint, because no matter what it takes to get to the ends that they want. They lack respect for others, including followers. They don't care about sustainability because they want it all now. And I think most importantly, dark side leaders, and this is the point I really want to leave you with, dark side leaders lack what I describe as a sustainable balance between me and we, between themselves and others, and between ends and means, okay? That sense of balance, in my view, and the view of many other leadership researchers, is crucial to effective leadership and sustainable leadership, okay? So, how do you know you're dealing with a dark side leader? Well, here are some of the behavioral characteristics that have been frequently observed, and the bracketed references are to the dark triad dimension that each of these behaviors speaks to. So making outrageous claims or overclaiming is narcissistic. Being an outrageous self-promoter is narcissistic, but it's also Machiavellian. Being aggressive after getting negative feedback from someone, can't possibly be me. You've got this all wrong. What are you saying about me? It's narcissism. That's a narcissistic response. Narcissists also encourage ego boosters. They want to surround themselves with yes men and yes women. And we know from other research that that can be organizationally fatal, because you're not getting a diversity of opinion, not getting people saying, hey, hang on, wait a minute, you might be wrong there. Can we rethink this? That's important to having a sense of decision-making, creative tension. Narcissists don't like that because they want everyone to agree with them. Domineering is both narcissistic and Machiavellian, and certainly psychopathic as well. Hoarding information is Machiavellian. Engaging in systematic scheming ticks all three of the dark triad boxes. Being habitually competitive is Machiavellian and psychopathic, probably also narcissistic in its nature. Being impulsive and reckless is narcissistic and psychopathic. Being a bully is psychopathic. It might have also narcissistic and perhaps Machiavellian undertones to it as well. And engaging in seduction and duplicity, certainly Machiavellians make an art form of that, and psychopaths can do it as well, okay? That's probably scared you rather overly. These are the things that need to be looked at. And what I'm trying to say is the dark side is very widely manifested in organizational life. I shudder to say that, but it is what it is. And the challenge is to understand it and to resist it or to question or challenge it. But I'm also saying that I don't think the light side characteristics of authenticity in particular are in and of themselves adequate to purpose. But look, I want to take you right back into the light now and share this diagram with you. It's a US-based cluster diagram, or it's derived from a study in the US of light side, the balance between light side and dark side characteristics in a sample of 1,500 or so US respondents. I think they were manager level respondents. The good news is, if you look at the cluster diagram, most individuals sit on the light triad sector, not on the dark triad sector. Okay, there are some outliers. You really wouldn't want to meet this person at a party. They would probably be quite disconcerting to you. Most of us sit up here somewhere on the light side, but there's also a significant number of people. You can see where I'm highlighting the diagram here. A lot of people straddle the line, and that's an important point. Dark side and light side are not necessarily binary. It's not necessarily that you have one and not the other. Quite a number of people appear to have elements of both dark and light side. And if there's a single message I want to leave you with, it's that, because it's both a reflection of what I think is the lived reality, but also it's a challenge to all of us to essentially work out how to manage that light side and dark side combination in the individuals with whom we work. So what am I saying in conclusion? What I'm saying to you basically is that good alone, particularly authenticity, may not be enough. You can be authentic and ineffectual. And the bad side, the dark side, may not be completely bad or completely evil. It might be that there are elements, for example, think of creativity or composure, that are desirable leadership attributes. Again, that's what the profiling suggests, that we need to take seriously. So where I'm going here is basically, and I'm no particular fan of Friedrich Nietzsche, the late 19th century German philosopher, particularly given that his thought fed into Nazism. But I think it is fair to say that Nietzsche, as a secularist, that is someone who wasn't religious, made a very good point about the need for all of us to move on from simplistic notions of good and evil, to recognize that the human condition is one that actually mixes what we might be labeled good and evil. It's there in all of us. If you don't have a degree of narcissism, you're not going to have the level of self-concept that you need to be effective at anything. And so we've got to appreciate that good and evil cohabit. What I want to end with is to say to you that I think, in terms of good or effective leadership, even great leadership, to use Jim Collins' phrase, good leadership is a constant balancing act between dark side and light side. If it's to be sustainable, the person in the leadership role needs to be aware of both their dark side and their light side. Right? There are no total saints and there are no total sinners in organizational life. We all need to move beyond that and recognize the lived reality, and that is most people have both will and humility. And it's the balance between will, which I think is a dark side, more a dark side trait, or not trait, sorry, more a dark side characteristic, and humility, which is more a light side character. In fact, it's a fundamentally central light side characteristic. That balance between the will to want to achieve something, that is to get to an end, and having sufficient humility to realize that you don't know it all, you can't do it all, and it's not all about you. Okay, that balance between will and humility, dark side, light side, I think holds the key to both good and sustainable leadership. From will comes having an achievement orientation, that is, you know the end you want to get to. You have an internal locus of control, which is management speak for you are confident that you can make a difference. And you've got self-confidence around that, that you can be assertive and that you have resilience. They are dark side characteristics. Okay. On the light side, particularly in relation to humility, self-reflection, openness, integrity, authenticity, and emotional intelligence, they are all very much the balancing, the countervail to will. It's very simplistic, I know, but I still think it's fair to propose to you that the balance between will and humility, or dark side and light side, is typically where good leadership resides. And sometimes leaders can tip too far one way or too far the other, or company boards can select someone who's got too much will and not enough humility, that is, they can never do any wrong and they know what they want to do, or too much humility, that is, they don't quite know, they're not sure, maybe they overthink their limitations. So the balance between will and humility, I think that's an important area for us to consider. Now, what I want to do is just really quickly go to some of the Q&As. Let me just, won't name any of the questioners, but I'm curious to know why those people can get the very high position. The behavior is very, okay, and is easily identified. Yeah, that's true, but it's, Donald J. Trump, how did he get elected to the presidency of the United States? Highly narcissistic. There's a PhD thesis in that. I think it's got to do, if I can speculate, with dark side characteristics, including charisma and the attribute of being able to, Machiavellian attribute of being able to manipulate and having, if you like, overweening self-confidence. I think that's part of the answer to that question, but it's a great question. Second question is it likely to be Machiavellian? Oops. Is it likely to be a Machiavellian, to be Machiavellianism, controlling narcissism leader in the real world? Like Muppets that appear a lot in many political movies, but in those cases, mostly the Muppets are usually the ones with low self-esteem. That's a profoundly complex question. If I understand you correctly, what I'm really saying to you is that it's my concluding point, that sustainable and effective leadership has to be a balancing act between will and humility. I think that's another way to answer the question. If I haven't answered it correctly, I'll come back to it later on. Another question, in life, there's so many dilemmas. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Do you think dark side leaders can handle those dilemmas better than light side leaders? What a fabulous question. You know what? I'm going to use a very old-fashioned leadership construct here called situational leadership and say to you, basically, it actually depends on the context within which the individual is seeking to lead. In some situations, it might be the case that you need a CEO who's got incredibly strong will to affect turnaround change in an organization. In other situations, it might be that you need a leader who, in fact, engages in what I love to describe as what I like to embrace philosophically as the notion of distributed leadership. That is, leadership is everywhere in an organization. It doesn't just sit in the boardroom or in the C-suite. A leader who has a sufficient degree of familiarity and emotional intelligence is actually more likely to be capable of inspiring followers than someone who, if you like, talks at them and exudes a quality that is all about their achievement as a leader. Another question: how to handle leaders with strong dark side orientation? Actually, the answer to that is one I'm very confident about. First of all, make sure you've got the reading right. Make sure you actually have profiled them well and you're confident in your judgment, and then handle with enormous care, because they will all come back to bite you. So where this often comes up to injure good people in organizations is where whistleblowers get pilloried by narcissists or Machiavellians or psychopaths, okay? And the best advice I can give to whistleblowers, apart from being courageous, is to understand who the enemy is likely to be, right? And that means understanding their the dark side potential in those who you might be questioning, whose decisions you might be questioning. One question here: between the dark side attributes of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellism, what would be the better leader quality? Oh, damn! I was hoping you wouldn't force me to make this call. I'm going to dodge it and say, you know what? They overlap really strongly. Typically, you'll find that it's like a Venn diagram, and those three characteristics overlap. Again, I think it depends on the situation. Richard Branson is narcissistic, and it's not a criticism, it's an observation of fact in my humble view. But he's been a very effective, and he's been a very effective business leader, with one or two exceptions. He also happens to have, his organizations happen to have a track record of sexism and sexual harassment that until recently wasn't at all adequately addressed. So I don't think any of us should feel the need to choose between these characteristics. They will pop up in various permutations. All I'm saying to you is be aware of them. Next one, it's a good idea to show these personality traits. Is it a good idea to show them or to keep them hidden? Well, if the questioner suspects that they might be dark side, I'd say first thing is make sure that you're aware of what the extent of your dark side is. Are you super narcissistic? Are you super psychopathic? Or do you believe it's marginal? The fact of the matter is that only Machiavellians and psychopaths are likely to want to hide their traits. Narcissists put it all out there. So that's a difference between the three characteristics. How do these different personalities get along? Well, actually, narcissists and psychopaths and Machiavellians are often one and the same person. That's why they're dark side characteristics. But we can come back to that later. What I need to do, they're all great questions, by the way. What I'd like to do is to very briefly, Karen, have we got a few more questions there? We have got a few more.
I think maybe we can circle back to these after.
Yeah, I'll come back later, because I would like, if it's okay, to say a few words about our business schools postgraduate offerings. Again, this is a difficult segue from dark side leadership to programs, but essentially, as I said at the start, leadership is a central consideration in management education, and also in human resource management education. So when we think about programs at postgraduate level in business and management, there are two sorts of programs in terms of learning content. There are programs that are technical specialists in nature. They get you to drill down into certain areas really deeply, whether it's accounting or finance or HR, for example. And there are more generic programs that are pitched more at developing leadership capabilities per se, rather than necessarily equipping people with deep technical skills. So it's on the right-hand side, they tend to be in the MSc and management space and the MBA and EMBA space. So the business administration side focuses on the leadership dimension to learning, and the pre-experienced masters, including our fantastic Master of Commerce and our specialist masters in HRM and IR, tend to focus more on the technical specialist side. But that is not to say that they don't also offer you lots of learning in the leadership space, but that is not their primary focus, okay? The other thing to think about is whether you are a pre-experienced, that is a student, that is you're straight out of your bachelor's degree, or you're a post-experienced student with a degree of work experience. If you've got work experience of three or more years, the MBA is likely to be a choice you might want to consider if you are looking to develop your leadership capabilities. Hopefully, more light side than dark side. If you're post-experienced in what technical specialist knowledge, say you're coming from a non-business background and you really want to skill up in data analytics or finance or HRM, then the specialist masters opportunities are what you might want to think about. That's probably the single most useful map of the postgraduate program space that I can offer you, and it'll help you maybe navigate through. Very quickly, what I would like to do is to talk to you briefly about the business schools postgraduate programs. These are the programs we offer in a nutshell. So our Master of Commerce and Master of Commerce Extension, they're 1.5 and 2 year programs. They have multiple specializations within them. In the 2 year program, you will generally do 2 specializations, and it might be international business and HRM, for example, or international business and marketing. In the 1.5 year program, which is open to students who've already got prior business study, you should do 1 specialization and you can pick up additional learning in other areas as well. The Master of Commerce is our single biggest master's program, and we are very keen to encourage highly capable pre-experienced and post-experienced students to think about getting deep technical knowledge in that area. But you can also, on the basis of the way we develop the program, you can also pick up, if you like, the breadth skills. I think about the MCOM as being a T-configured curriculum. The upright of the T is the technical depth. The crossbar of the T is the generalist or leadership capability development. And we know that, generally speaking, employers are now looking for that combination of technical depth and capability breadth at one and the same time, not one or the other. The technical specialist programs we have, the one I wanted to showcase briefly is the Master of HRM and IR. It's a 1.5 year program full-time. It's a conversion master's program, so you don't have to have studied business before to get into it. The Master of International Business is slightly shorter. That does have a pre-experience, it does have a prior business qualification requirement. The Master of Logistics and Supply Chain doesn't. Master of Professional Accounting doesn't either. So they're what we call conversion masters. And then on top of that, we have a suite of very highly ranked management and leadership development programs, including, of course, our MBAs. We've got 2 MBAs. One is a full-time, one is a part-time program. The MBA that's full-time is the Master of Business Administration, Leadership and Enterprise. For that program, we have an intake in August, and the part-time MBA is primarily for work-sponsored and domestic students. We also have a global executive MBA that requires 10 years of work experience. The MBAs require 3 or more years of work experience to get in, as well as academic standards or a GMAT score. The Master of Management and Master of Management SEMs are what we call Masters of Science in Management programs. They're pre-experienced programs. You don't have to have business experience. With Master of Management, you don't actually have to have a business or management bachelor's degree. So you can go into that from any bachelor's background. The Master of Management SEMs is a program that we offer with 34 other great business schools around the world, and it does require prior business study. So we've got all of the key bases covered in terms of breadth and depth, specialist and generalist, pre-experience and post-experience. And I'm really proud of this program suite. The Master of HRM and IR, it's a program that I've been very deeply involved with over the years. The Masters is 1.5 years. For domestic students, we also have subordinate degrees, graduate diploma and graduate certificate. If you want to basically dabble before you go for full Masters, you can start with a graduate certificate. This is if you're a domestic student, and you can, if you meet the credit grade requirement to go to Masters, you can carry up with you full credit for what you've studied at the grad dip level. You don't have to start again. So it rolls up, if you like. This is a great program in a whole lot of ways. It's also accredited by the Human Resource Professional Body, Australian Human Resources Institute, and it gets really strong reviews from our students. These are the units in units of study or subjects as we know them in this Masters. Foundation unit is a Foundations of HRM and IR, Industrial Relations. The advanced units are HR strategies, emerging challenges in industrial relations, and HR data insights. That last unit is crucially important if you're thinking about becoming a professional HR practitioner, because you need to be able to understand the data now with data and with big data and robotics and artificial intelligence. Having a capability around data analysis is not an optional extra. It's absolutely mission critical. And we've got a quite comprehensive suite of electives in the program as well, including one that I put on the books quite a few years ago, Performance and Rewards, which is one of my areas of specialist study. So you can see it's a very comprehensive suite of electives that you can choose, whether you want to be a reward specialist, or whether you want to be a recruitment specialist or diversity and inclusion specialist. This program has all of that learning content available to you. Or if you want to be an HR practitioner, but with a really strong sense of employment law, then the industrial relations side is very salient to that particular specialist choice. Very, very briefly on the Master of Commerce front, these are the specializations that you can do within the Master of Commerce. I won't name them, you can read them. The newest of these is Strategy, Innovation and Management, and it's that specialization that really does speak quite closely to the matters that I've shared with you today in the area of leadership theory and practice. Master of Commerce was revitalized last year. And we've got 2 Masters of Commerce. One is a 2-year Master of Commerce extension. That is if you wanted to pick up 2 specializations as opposed to the one that you can do in the 1.5-year program. And remembering that there's an admission standard difference as well. 1.5-year program is only available to you if you already have prior business study. Okay. And if you're a domestic student, you can start with a small step and do the graduate certificate in commerce first, half a year full-time equivalent, 1 year part-time, of course, graduate diploma in commerce. You can upgrade from the grad cert and or the grad dip to the Master of Commerce if that is what you want to do, okay, and you want to take it step at a time. These are our pre-experience management programs, or I like to call them our baby MBAs, which is not meant to be derisory. These are fantastically good programs. The Master of Management is globally ranked, and the Master of Management SIMS is a program that we offer in conjunction with 34 great business schools around the world. And you can see what business schools I'm talking about if you go to our website. Master of Management is a conversion master's. You want to pick up management and leadership capabilities from a non-business background, the Master, and you want to do it straight after your bachelor's degree, the Master of Management is a perfect choice for you. You don't have to wait 3 years to do an MBA if you want to go straight into master's level study. Master of Management SEMS, in the normal course of things, involves students studying at 1 or 2 other schools in the SEMS Global Alliance for Management Education, in the Americas, in Asia, in Europe, and elsewhere around the world, including now in Africa. The full-time MBA Leadership and Enterprise, absolutely a great emphasis in here on the dark and the light sides of leadership and leadership capability development. These are happy snaps of, I think, the second intake, the August intake. from last year, and you can see that it's a bit like the United Nations in terms of the diversity involved. It's capped. We only take 50 students in, and once a year in the August intake, so it's hotly competitive. 3 or more years of work experience. Look, if you did a bachelor's degree quite some time ago and your grade point average isn't around the 65% Australian equivalence terms, you can actually do a GMAT test, and we'll take the GMAT test as an alternative. Let me conclude by saying to you that our school is very proud of its positioning in terms of both national and international reputation. We are Triple Crown accredited. That is, we have all 3 of the key global business school accreditations, third-party accreditations, the AACSB, EQUIS, and AMBER. We're also Australia's only business school in the SIMS Global Alliance in Management Education. We rank exceptionally well in terms of graduate outcomes, graduate employability. I should say our university does, and so therefore do we. And our disciplines rank very strongly in the QS discipline, global discipline rankings. And on any estimate, our school is really in the top 1% of business schools in the world. So what I want to do is to challenge you now to think about what your next career move might be, and what your choice of degree might be that aligns with your career preferences. But I'm getting very close to being over time, so I just want to say to you, these are the links that you can tap into to maintain your dialogue with us, and we would really welcome you doing that. We want to talk with you, not at you, about your preferences. So look, thank you. Karen, I think we're pretty close to time, yes?
Yes, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I have done my best to answer some of the question that has come through while you were doing this last program showcase section. So we still have some questions relating to your masterclass, but I think we might leave them for now. There is one last one that's sort of doesn't see into the program space, but I think it's a good question. What are the future potential career opportunity employment? It mentions specifically KPMG and PwC, but I think, you know, in general, I suppose, do you want to close by just touching on in terms of career opportunities that our students are sort of seeking and wanting a bit more information on?
So let me tell you, thank you, Karen. Let me tell you a story about one of our newly minted graduates. Her name is Sveta. She's from India. She completed our Master of Commerce. In fact, I think she completed it, Karen, this semester. Is that right? Is completing it this semester. She has been hired by Deloitte in Sydney, and she has now every opportunity available to her to grow her career internationally with Deloitte, which is, of course, a global partnership. So to answer your question, it's a really good and understandable question, as directly as I can. Everyone knows at the moment that things are tight in terms of employment opportunities per se. But you know what? If you look at the signs in the Australian professional labour market, there are very clear signs of a resurgence. I actually think it's happening earlier than I had thought it would, but it does appear to be happening. There is graduate hiring happening. And including amongst the big 4 firms, 2 of which you've mentioned in that question. So my answer to you is the prospects are actually looking much stronger than all of us had feared they might be when COVID first hit. We appear to be coming out of COVID, and I'm not a medical advisor or practitioner or expert, but I'm quietly confident that once the Australian vaccination rate gets way into the majority and our borders do start to cautiously reopen to international travel, that the Australian economy is going to come roaring back into shape. It'll be different. You know, we won't be returning to the pre-COVID era in a whole lot of ways. For example, work from home is likely to be a permanent feature of part of our working week from now on. I personally think that's a clever thing and desirable. But to answer your question, and yes, of course, I'm going to be optimistic because our produces lots of graduates each year who enter the professional labour market. But I am genuine, I'm authentic about saying that I believe that the professional job opportunities in firms like the ones you mentioned are really going to be actually bouncing right back very soon. And Sveta, our recent graduate or soon to be graduate working for Deloitte, is, I think, an archetypal example of that resurgence.
I've just also, thank you, John, for that. I've also just dropped a link for I know there's many international students in the audience tonight, so I've just included our Job Smart Edge program link in there.
Right.
If you haven't already, this is an employability program unique to the business school at Sydney University. So definitely check it out. There's a couple of YouTube videos on there as well, showcasing some of the students who've gone through the program. Sweta was one of them who successfully not only complete the program, but became our Job Smart Edge ambassador as well.
But Karen, I think we need to wrap it up. But I'm just saying these questions that the people who've attended the masterclass are asking are brilliant questions. So look, for those of you who want to follow up with any of these questions, my email address at uni is this. If you want to have a discussion or even an argument with me, that's cool. My email address is john.shields, SHIELDS, @sydney.edu.au. Don't be shy. Send me a message. I'll try to get back to you as quickly as I can. And I apologize for not having fielded all the questions that are there, but they are good questions worthy of responses. Thank you, Karen, and thank you, USyd team. And thank you, most importantly, to all the participants.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Have a lovely evening. And we look forward to seeing you in the school very soon.